You should already have watched the TED Talk on expectation gap. There were three main types of gaps he spoke about in this video. So he talked about the imagination gap. What we imagine is generally better than reality. The interpersonal gap, we perceive others' reality to be better than our reality. And the intertemporal gap, our past seems better than the present. And I bring these up for a specific reason. Of course, I asked you as part of your discussion this week to answer, how can we apply the expectation gap to relationships? I'm going to go into more detail about how we can do that. So to answer this question, we have to go into your reading a bit for this week. As you may have noticed, social exchange and interdependence is all about people's expectations for behavior in their relationships. Their expectations about what they will get, their expectations about reward, their expectations about what they might get if they were in a different relationship. The basic building blocks of social exchange are rewards and costs. Rewards are results of an interaction that are gratifying, welcome, and fulfilling. Costs are consequences that are frustrating, distressing, and undesirable. Obviously, we generally prefer rewards and want to avoid costs. The outcome of an interaction, or another way of thinking about this, is how you feel about your relationship. It's net profit or loss. If you add up all the rewards and costs, your outcome is the rewards minus costs, your net profit or loss. Interdependence theory suggests that we evaluate the outcomes we receive with two criteria. So this is what we expect from our relationships. That's the first one. And so that affects our satisfaction. And then how well we think we can do with other partners. And that affects our commitment or our stay, leave decisions. So what do we expect from our relationships? Each of us has a personal comparison level. This describes what we expect and what we feel like we deserve in our relationship. When our outcomes, or our rewards and costs, exceed our comparison levels, or what we expect, we're happy and content. But when our outcomes, again, that's our rewards and costs, fall below our comparison levels, or what we expect, we're disgruntled and distressed. So the interesting thing about this is, even if your relationship has some positive things, or even if it's generally more rewarding than it is costly, if it doesn't meet what you expect, even if it is net positive, if it's not as positive as you expected it to be, you're still going to be unhappy. So your comparison level is the standard with which your satisfaction with a relationship is assessed. So your outcomes, that's your rewards and costs, minus your comparison level, again, that is your expectation, gives you your satisfaction or dissatisfaction in the relationship. Even if a relationship is profitable and rewarding, you may not be satisfied if the profit isn't enough to meet your expectations. This goes back to the expectation gap video. If we go back to the TEDx talk, this is an example of the imagination gap. We may be dissatisfied in our relationships if our outcomes do not meet our comparison level. In other words, our expectations, what we imagine. Another question is how well we could do elsewhere, right? So whether or not we're happy or satisfied in our relationship, we also evaluate our partnerships with a comparison level for alternatives that describes the outcomes we think we can get elsewhere. So even if we have a relatively happy relationship, if we think we can do better, we might still leave the relationship, right? So our comparison level for alternatives are the lowest level of outcomes we will expect from our current partners, because if they're not meeting those expectations, we'll go find someone who we think will. So if we think we can do better in another relationship, we're likely to leave our current partner and pursue that better relationship, even if we're currently happy with what we've got. On the other hand, even if we're miserable, we won't leave unless there's a better alternative. Some theorists have used this as an explanation for why people might stay in an abusive relationship. If you don't expect that you'll be better off if you leave, you might stay even if you're miserable. A comparison level for alternatives is a complex, multifaceted judgment. It involves both the cost of leaving and the rewards offered by others. So basically, this theory says we're doing all this complicated calculus in our head. We're doing it outside of our conscious awareness, because most of us are not aware that we're sitting here. Some people will sit down and make a list, all the reasons to stay with my partner, all the reasons to leave my partner. The vast majority of us don't do that. This is all supposedly. going on in our heads in the background. Our investments in a relationship, the things that we would lose if it ends, make it harder to leave and reduce our comparison level for alternatives. This can include things like children. It can include buying a house together. It could include pets. It could include things you bought together, but it can also be less obvious. So it could be things like shared friendships. When a couple breaks up, who gets to keep their friends? These kinds of things are investments in the current relationship. Keeping in mind that the comparison level for alternatives includes both the costs and rewards of departing a relationship, our outcome, or our rewards and costs in our current relationship, minus the comparison level for alternatives, will determine how dependent or independent we are of this relationship. And if we go back to the TEDx talk, this is an example of the interpersonal gap. We perceive others' reality to be better than our reality. That is, we think we would be better off if we had a different partner, right? So that's when our partner doesn't meet our expectations for what we could have with someone else. The comparison level and the comparison level for alternatives change as time goes by. They're not static things, they fluctuate. Our comparison levels are based on our past experiences. If we've only ever had bad relationships, then a slightly good one seems amazing. Or if we've only ever had good relationships, then a not so great one may seem absolutely horrendous. Our comparison levels from our past tell us how well we're doing in our current relationship. And they fluctuate along with the outcomes, the rewards and costs that we receive. So excellent outcomes might delight us at first, but then if we come to take them for granted, our comparison levels will rise and those outcomes will gradually become less satisfying. And this is not because the good outcomes are no longer good. It's because our expectations. And so this is like the TEDx talk when we're talking about the intertemporal gap and what happens with the lottery. If you win the lottery and you get all of your money up front, or maybe you get the same amount of money over time, but it never increases, then you actually are less happy than if you had less at the beginning and it increased over time. So the same thing here. If our past in the relationship seems better than the present, maybe because we come to take positive behaviors for granted rather than being pleasantly surprised, or maybe because we just start to have higher expectations, then we'll be less happy in our relationships. Now, as rewards and costs as time goes by change, right? So we already talked about this. Things don't stay. And most developing relationships, even those that will succeed, hit a lull in which the partner's pleasure stalls for a time. So maybe there will be a point in time where you're just not quite as happy. There's a lot to adjust to as interdependency increases, as you become more and more committed to your current partner. When people first start to date, they may have this huge increase in relationship satisfaction as they're falling in love, they're infatuated, they think this is an amazing person. And then maybe they become a certain amount of committed, maybe they stop seeing other people, or maybe they start moving in together, they're sharing chores or something along those lines, and things just kind of peter out for a little bit. They're not quite so great anymore. But then they will rise again. After this rapid rise in satisfaction at the beginning, many couples encounter a lull and then become happier again. It has to do with adjusting expectations. Part of it is learning who your partner really is, and part of it is being interdependent. So you don't get to make all the decisions anymore. You have to compromise. Sometimes you sacrifice things for your partner. You do what they want to do instead of what you want to do. And so there are more costs. This is true in all relationships. Even those that succeed will end up becoming happier. According to the relational turbulence model, doubt and uncertainty can accompany emerging commitment. When you're casually dating, things seem great at first, and then as intimacy starts to increase, you also start to see more turmoil or conflict. As you become more serious, there's a point where there's a lot more conflict. And then as you continue into more serious involvement, the conflict kind of goes down some. You're less likely to have this turbulence, this uncertainty, as you become more seriously involved. Are there predictable changes in satisfaction over longer stretches of time in established relationships? I have alluded to this a couple of times in the past few weeks. There are changes, and for most of us, it's bad news. There is just a continuous decrease in satisfaction over time. So this is at the point when they got married, As you can see, their marital satisfaction keeps going down. I found this also in another longitudinal data set of married couples. We also saw this dramatic decrease that levels off over time. Ours was around year 9. It seemed to come back up again. That may be partly because the people who were really severely distressed left. They divorced, and so they were no longer part of the sample. In general, people's average marital satisfaction goes down over time. I'm sorry to say it, but the good news is if you don't feel as satisfied as you once did, it's probably normative, right? It's not necessarily the end of your relationship or anything like that. This is probably partly due to that intertemporal gap in expectations. If your relationship isn't constantly getting better and better, which if you think about it, that's hard to do, it's hard to always be on the increase, then you may no longer be meeting your expectations because your expectations have gotten higher. You may be less amazed by your partner than you were. This doesn't happen to everyone. About 1 in 4 very lucky couples don't experience any decline in their happiness. So generally, we found that people who had greater positive illusions or directional bias at the time that they got married showed less of a decline than those who did not show that strong directional bias. And of course, most couples do experience this decrease in their satisfaction over time.